Education is a tool for forming a human, it's for forming a leader. It's a tool for developing judgment, for developing competence. When families make education the goal or schooling the goal, you start to optimize for grades and test scores and curriculum and things like that. You end up with very well-schooled children who aren't leaders. I want to talk through a concept here, and this is a difficult concept for a lot of people to understand, but I need people to think through this. Education itself is a tool. Education itself is not a goal. A lot of families have that completely backwards. Families will make education some sort of destination in their mind instead of the vehicle to get them to the destination. When you make a tool your goal, nothing works. If you think about it I like to use a hammer as an example, right? A hammer is a great tool for building a house. If you optimize everything for the hammer, you make that hammer your object of worship, you end up with a really, really great hammer, maybe even a cool hammer collection. You don't have a house. Education's very much the same sort of thing. So the goal is not education. The goal is leadership formation. Education is a tool you use to get there. That's a big reframe for a lot of people. So I want to do that a little bit in this video. I want you to think through this because you need to understand that education is a means to an end, not the end itself. Something that can't end at all. The purpose of education is not to get to some sort of arbitrary, esoteric finish line and go, oh, I'm educated, I'm all done. We know that, right? The purpose is to be continuously growing, to continuously form capabilities and new competences. And that's what education is. But somewhere along the way, we were trained that there's a finish line. We start measuring success because of that finish line by how much we regurgitate, in sterile environments, instead of saying, well, what can you do with what you theoretically know? I've had this conversation with parents, for years and years and years. I said, what do you want for your child's future? And they'll always say something like, I want them to get a good education so they can think critically, so they can solve problems, so they can have great relationships, so they can be a contributing member of society, they can be joyous, yada, yada. And that's a great answer. It's real. It's always that. It is never, I've never once had somebody say, oh, I want them to get into Harvard and really be solid at calculus, and get a 90% on their calculus. And we've also been convinced that for some reason that is a step when there's infinite steps to take. And it doesn't have to have those things in there, in order to be an educated human being. So we have to stop optimizing for a transcript of tool worship. Where everything else breaks. We start to optimize for schooling, which means we optimize for the wrong outcomes. If schooling is your goal, you're going to measure success by the metrics that system provides you. It's going to be grades, it's going to be test scores, it's going to be acceptance letters, it's going to be degrees. Those things could indicate a foundation of knowledge. They have no indication that you can lead, that you can apply the knowledge. It is very possible, and you and I both know people that are great at school, terrible at life. Answer questions on a test, you bet. Make a decision when the answer is not provided, not happen, right? Follow instructions, you bet. Create a plan when nobody's giving them one, not at all, right? So people can start to lose agency. They hand control over their script, their life script over to the system, and the school decides what matters. The curriculum decides what's important. The test decides what success looks like. The family just ends up following along, and they hope that the system delivers. You can create passive humans. When schooling is the goal, the child's job is to receive, right? Just to absorb, to comply, show up, do the work, pass the test, and move on to the next level. When leadership formation is the goal, the child has to engage. He or she's got to contribute. They have to create. There's got to be a responsibility they take, right? They can't be passive recipients. The system creates passivity because the system requires compliance. Leadership requires agency. You can't develop agency in a system that is optimized for compliance. And you end up missing the real work in this, right? When school's the goal, you focus all your energy on academic performance. You end up stressing over grades. You end up worrying about things like test prep. You obsess over the right curriculum. But the real work, the work that makes you competent, gets neglected because it doesn't show up on the report card. Right? So you end up with a lot of kids, and you guys all know these, end up with a lot of kids that 4.0 GPA, but they can't handle conflict. They can't handle their emotions. They can't communicate. They can't manage money. They can't lead a team. make decisions without getting external validation and get super stressed. We can't have that. It's why Apogee as an organization, so we refuse to lead a conversation with curriculum, right? Curriculum is a tool. A project is a tool. If we lead with the tool, we're making the same mistake as everybody else. So the question we start with is, what kind of leaders are we forming? How does this child in particular need to become, a more responsible leader, and where can they become more competent? Maybe they need, this child needs some real world stakes. They need to be able to exercise judgment in a business context, whatever that looks like. It's not about getting another worksheet. It's not about diving into another workbook. When a family comes to an Apogee campus and they say, well, what curriculum do you use? They're asking the wrong question. I get it. They're trained to ask that question because they still think that schooling is the goal. That's the goal of everything we're doing. The right question is, how are you forming leaders? What is the environment that's here that is going to develop competent humans? How are they earning their autonomy inside of that environment? How are they showing growth? How are they knocking out the goals that they and their parents set, right? And when you get that, you can start to answer with like, hey, here's the real world projects. Here's the decision-making, under accountability. Here's, where they're going to gain ownership over time. Like when you could start to play that game and you start to get that right, education becomes the tool and not the goal. You create space for growth, for judgment, for competence. You can watch them learn to make good decisions when the answer is not given to them. They've got experience making decisions with living with the consequences of those decisions, good and bad, reflecting on what worked and what didn't, and adjusting, right? It's the fire, aim, ready mentality. It's the scientific method of learning. It's how learning always works. And that's a beautiful thing to watch. You don't form that judgment in a system where every question has one correct answer and somebody else already knows it. I like to use the example. We have a 15-year-old on one of our campuses running a tutoring business. He's developing real-world competence. He's got to decide how to price his services. He's got to make that decision. He has to figure out how to attract his clients. He's got to figure out the communication piece there, right? How does he manage his time? He's got to handle some difficult situations when there's an unhappy parent or when a student is not making the right progress. There's no teacher giving him the answer. There's no rubric. These are real clients. There's real consequences. It's real money. All that's a real experience. And education gets used as a tool in that regard. He needs to understand the subject well enough to teach it. He needs to develop communication skills, handle conflict, handle his emotions. He'll need basic business math, right? So all of these educational skills serve the competence. It's not the other way around. Compare that to, a standard 15-year-old, same age, same person in a different environment, in a classroom environment. And it's like, hey, you're going to learn about entrepreneurship by reading this, maybe watching this, and you're going to write a report on it. And you can get an A and you might know vocab, but you haven't developed judgment. You haven't developed any real world competence. You can say maybe you've learned about business, but you can't say you've run one. Such a different experience, right? When education is the goal, maybe you get knowledge, but when leadership formation and competence is the goal, it's a whole different outcome. So bottom line, education is a tool. Education is not the goal. The goal is leadership formation. Keep your goal clear. Use the tools you have wisely and build leaders.